What's up? Good afternoon or good evening. It's still daytime out, so I'll say good afternoon today. Uh, Thank you all for joining us for another episode of the CS Podcast. We've been away for a few weeks. I needed to take some time off, and I tried to do like replays, but I don't know how to do it on this, and it just didn't work out. So I was like, I'll just see y'all when I see y'all. So it's nice to see y'all. It's nice to be back. And today's show is going to be super exciting. Super informative, to the most interesting and dynamic people that I do know. So I'm thankful that they were able to join us today. But before we get started, as always, give homage to Leroy Powell. If you do not know, Leroy Powell was 15 years old in 2014. He was shot and killed after he witnessed an attempted murder turned to infanticide. He, agreed to be a witness. And his witness statement was played during the preliminary hearing of the young man who did the shooting. And our local news decided that it was an okay thing to do to play it on the 11 o'clock news. Both Leroy and his mother were completely visible. They did nothing to hide him or his mother or his voice. And immediately they received death threats. And several days later, Leroy was gone. So it is Leroy, in honor and just holding the fact that this child should still be here, and he's not, that the narrative justice that the CS Podcast even exists in the first place. We should always hold our media, local and national, accountable, any forms of media accountable for the ways, especially when they show up in our communities, because people do live and die by these things. Like, narrative is so powerful, so powerful. Our communities are built on them. As a reminder, it only takes about 25% of the community for change to occur. So don't think that you have to have everybody on board before you start to do things. You don't have to get everybody on the same page to start to move forward. If you notice that something needs to be changed, you can very well do that. And as a reminder, Pittsburgh is only about 310,000 people, less than that now. Shout out to Black people being pushed out due to gentrification and displacement. So it's a very small city, relatively speaking. So you only need about 25% of the city to make change. Keep that in mind always. Like, don't let anybody convince you that you cannot make change. And as always, tomorrow, just keep an eye out for today's news, Changing Our Narratives. That's every Monday at 7 p.m. on QK Productions Facebook page, their YouTube page, and their Twitter is Black News 325. YouTube also Black News 325. That's produced by QK Production. Miss Denise Shealy Graham is also our producer. She's away today. But definitely check it out. They cover everything that is current in Pittsburgh and also Black news generally. Their last couple of episodes was focused on the importance of having a doula. And I learned so much about birthing and birth work, as a newlywed. It was so much important information, especially because like doctors freak me out, like hospitals freak me out. If I'm being honest, like I have a lot of distrust around the medical field because of medical apartheid, et cetera, et cetera. So if you are like me, like I would definitely go back and check out that episode, but definitely check them out tomorrow as well. So as we all know, like there's chaos due to COVID and just chaos that already existed. So if you are someone who is struggling to pay your rent, there is rent assistance that's available. COVID rent relief is pretty accessible. The Wellness Collective is running one of the drop-in centers in McKeesport. So if you do need extra assistance with rent or utilities, feel free to come and check us out. It's 337 Fifth Avenue in McKeesport, PA. We're open Monday through Friday, 10 to 6 on most days. On Thursday, it's 12 to 8. In that drop-in center, we also have a food pantry and a free item. I don't even know what to call it, but we got free stuff there, like really dope stuff, actually. Clothing, toiletries, household items, and a bunch of other stuff that's really great. So if you want to just jump down there and see what we have going on down there, you can. If you want to donate to the pantry or the other free space, you can do that as well. Or if you want to apply for the rent relief program, you can do that. But you also can apply on your own. You can do that online at covidrentrelief.alleghenycounty.us. The application is pretty simple if you know how to navigate like technology. It's not really like confusing or anything, but if you want to come say hi, you can always say hi to us. So I think that's all I'm going to run my mouth about today before we get started. So like I said, I'm excited about our conversation today. Today we'll be talking about all things credit. Had a brief conversation with these two folks recently, and I was like learning so much about it, like that I was like, oh, people should talk about this. Like we should actually do this. And so like now we're here doing the things, which is always my favorite thing to do. So the first person I'm going to bring on is Miss Tammy Thompson. You know her, you love her. Hey, Miss Tammy, how are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Doing good, doing good. Thank you for yesterday.
Of course, absolutely. And I don't think there's anything that you will ever ask me to do that I would not do.
Aw, big heart. Big hearts. That's love. That's love. So Miss Tammy, did you want to introduce yourself any sort of way, or you Miss Tammy today?
No, I'm just Miss Tammy today.
Ooh.
I'm just chilling with my homie.
Yes. That's like it's sparingly that I'll like do the and I'm and this person, like I'm usually just sharing.
Yeah.
That way.
Get enough of that all week long, So no, we don't have to do that.
Exactly. All right. So we're going to bring up Ron Gatos. What's up, Ron?
Hey, excuse me. How you doing? Hi, Tammy.
Ron.
Good. How are you?
Fine. Yeah. Nice long weekend and celebrating workers. We have our own holiday for some reason. We don't do it May 1st, but we're workers with everyone else.
What's May 1st? Did I miss it?
May Day is the International Workers Celebration Day. Yeah, May 1st. Yeah.
I did not know that.
I think, the holiday legislation or the tradition changed it to September. I guess I'm not sure why. My guess, and it's a guess, I have to look into this, is that people just wanted it to be celebrated at a different time, not have solidarity with workers all over the world.
Interesting. Ron, you are always a wealth of knowledge that I never even think about.
I think too much sometimes.
Good trivia.
But I crash and burn during Trivial Pursuits and games like that. So, yeah.
So it doesn't come in handy when the money's on the table.
It hasn't happened yet.
Cool. Well, but as I was saying, thank you both for being here today. Super dope conversation. Even in our prep conversations, I've learned so much in that little bit of time. So, as you both know, like we had a little, back and forth regarding credit a little while ago, a few days ago. I've recently learned how new, like just the concept. I don't know if this concept is the right word, but like the use of credit, I would say. Is that what it is?
So I think I saw this, it was a meme that was going around that was basically saying that people were shocked that credit just was very newly introduced in 1989, which is not 100% true, which is why we got to be careful about getting our information on social media, because a whole lot was left out. A whole lot of context was left out. Some of it was very factual. The three most popular, most used, well-known credit reporting agencies, the actual formula that is used that we call the FICO scores was introduced in 1989. So, but credit actually goes back quite a long way in various forms, and a long way, like 5,000 years. There's evidence that credit was used all the way back to 5,000 years in different ways, which is really interesting when you think about money and how people use money and what it was used for, and bartering systems and all of these things. Credit is also one of the things that can be traced back that far. And I just think it's really interesting, all the different ways that it was. Now, there are some common, I mean, it's really interesting. But what and I never really, just being honest, I never really studied the history of credit too far back. I have studied back probably as far as the 1960s, 1970s, because I just was really intrigued by how credit was used to keep certain demographics of people outside of the financial outskirts, let's say. Primarily, my focus has been Black folks and women. And I just never really thought about it beyond that. So that was really interesting. Seeing Ron's comment on that post really had me do a whole bunch of research, and I just have been reading about it ever since. It's really, really cool. So I'll let Ron sort of expound on his discoveries. I think you're on.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, thanks. That was a really great discussion. Who knew that economics and credit could be so sexy? How about that? But this goes, as you were saying, 5,000 years. That's like the Sumerian Empire. Back then, there was records of informal credit and debt. Between that, there's a guy named David Graeber who wrote the book Debt: The First 5,000 Years, and he goes into there's common misconceptions that everybody bartered at first, and then how could they carry a cow to up over to the market? But the informal systems of credit and debt existed first, and then money was invented, and then he compiles up a whole bunch of evidence that then, after money and hierarchies were developed, that the system of credit and debt institutionalized the hierarchy and the inequality that was built into that. So that was frightening, and we can see where this this is headed. But that's just interesting. I always like to get oriented. Instead of that's my compass for saying, okay, where are we at? What's been happening? How did we get here? So it doesn't get you to drive your car off the lot, but it like we were talking about, it really helps us to understand where things are and how we can navigate the systems.
Now, before, so Ms. Tammy, you said the FICO score was introduced in '89, right?
Yeah. So in 1989, these two brothers came along. Fair, I forgot his first name, but his last name was Fair. The other one's last name was Isaacs. So the Fair Isaac score is FICO is short for Fair Isaac Company. These two came together and developed this formula that was supposed to help with eliminating subjective information that was obviously discriminating against certain groups of people. So they wanted to take all of that personal piece out, which is what the Fair Credit Act was supposed to do in 1970, but people were still finding ways around it. And once it started getting more computerized, more organized so that credit could actually be reported nationwide, these guys came up with this reporting formula that sort of streamlined everything. And the major credit bureaus actually picked it up and started using it. So now today what you see is Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion using this particular formula to report, to collect and report on data. Now, there are other credit reporting formulas, which is what I tell folks who come to us seeking credit counseling, is what you see on certain credit reports are not necessarily a FICO score, meaning that there's a different formula that's being used. There's one called Vantage. There's others that are being used by smaller percentages of the country that are not recognized by most major lenders. The FICO score that you see when you apply for a loan or auto financing or any major loan, they are all using the FICO score, which is relatively new. I mean, 1989, I have kids that were born in 1989, right? It's only 30 years, not that long ago. So these things have been transitioning and changing for generations, right? And I believe it's going to continue to change. I don't think the credit scores that we use and see most commonly today are what are going to always be used. I think as we evolve, particularly, and I'm being very optimistic here, but particularly as social justice and inequity and economic justice and all of these things start to become more prevalent, hopefully, and I'm speaking that into existence, as people start to think about how much damage has been done to this society and how people have been left out of the economy in so many different ways, I believe that the credit reporting system is also going to evolve in a more positive way. I'm speaking that because I do believe it. I think it's possible. And I think when we're thinking of ways to create equity in wealth building and economics, that we have to think about all of these systems and institutions and policies that were created and rooted in racism and sexism and classism and elitism and all of these isms that people have desperately been attempting to hold on to so that their place in the world is not reduced. But I think as these things start to get torn down, we have to tear down these institutions that were created to intentionally leave certain people out.
What was wild, Tammy, about one of the articles you posted was the roots of Experian, one of the organizations, MMS, I think it was originally, their index was for economic behavior, cultural, racial, even sexual behavior. That's just wild. Can you imagine how far back that is? So looking ahead from what you're talking about, what would make a really equitable and transparent and empowering, credit evaluation for people that puts us all in a level playing field? That's that distance from behind is where we want to go ahead, isn't it?
Did you say they looked at your sexual behaviors?
Yes, they did. I don't know how they found out. They must have had spies or whatever. Yeah.
Well, everything was so subjective, right? Everything was so subjective. Just imagine. I mean, we're talking about a system that was created when every single person who was in power or who had a hand in creating law and policy were rich white men, right? That was it. Nothing else mattered. No other opinions mattered. Nothing, no other character indicators mattered. That was it. Rich white.
I'll add the rich white men and the ones who wanted to be.
Yeah, right. So rich, and I forgot rich white male Christian, right? Because the church played a big part in this. Actually, it was interesting. I read the church, and this was back when the church was really who ran the countries, right? The church ran the world. The church laid down the law of what was moral and what was immoral. And the church basically said that usury was immoral and that you shouldn't be charging interest on debt at all. And then some rich white man, some hundreds of years later, came and said, no, we've got to do that. We've got to charge interest because of capitalism. Capitalism is how innovation, we can't, if we don't charge interest, we won't have money to invest in innovation and growing and moving forward, when really what that meant was we can't get rich off of folks who, we can't sell goods and services to people unless they have cash on hand. There was only a limited amount of money who had that kind of cash. So if you didn't have access to credit, then there was a big market that was being left out of capitalism. And really, it was the car industry that set the tone for consumer credit, right? It sounds really crazy, but in the 1900s, when cars were really at the height of consumerism, and cars were sort of at the center of that. There were only a handful of people who could afford to buy a car outright. So to help the car industries grow, consumer credit became more talked about and made more readily available to regular people. So that's just really crazy to me, because when you think about that industry, Detroit, the Fords, GM, General Motors, all of those places, that's really, without credit, they wouldn't have become what they became. That industry wouldn't have become what it became, because people could not afford to just go out and smack down money and buy a car. So the car industry sort of opened up the consumer credit industry, which is really interesting to me.
That brings to mind that one credit card that's old, and I don't know what happened to it, called Diners Club. And they did for the upscale restaurant industry that credit did for the car industry. Interesting.
It is. It's just really funny when you think about, so if you think about the premise of credit, like, oh, we just wanted to give regular people access to more. It really wasn't about regular people. It was about growing these industries. It was about growing and increasing and making capitalism something that the country could be grown on. It's just really wild when you think about what would have happened had credit not have been more streamlined and more consumers would not have had access to it. So the car industry opened it up, and then it began opening to appliances, right? And you could get a washer and dryer on credit. Then you could get a refrigerator and a stove. And these installment sort of loans started happening. And the more people saw, wait a minute, we can start making money off of this. We can really start increasing our customer base if we give people access to credit. But it was only really considered for the middle and upper class. It was never considered for what they called lower classes to have access to. It was really something that was only offered to middle class white families. And families, I also mean single women didn't have access to credit either, whether you were black, white, whatever color. If you were single, you were considered a credit risk. You wouldn't be trusted to pay it back, which is just, again, such connected to patriarchy and how everything is so connected to patriarchy in this country. So even women who were making more, which, back then there weren't a lot of working women, but the ones who were still couldn't access credit without a husband. So if you were a single woman and you were making your own money and you were working regardless of how much money you earned, you most likely would not have been allowed to have credit on your own. And that is just, up until 1970, which is not that long ago, the federal government had to actually enact a law to make it possible that people couldn't be discriminated against and not be allowed to have access to credit. So these things weren't that long ago, right? And it's one of the things that I'm really, really feel compelled to do when working with people who are struggling with learning about credit and learning how to access credit, to help them rid themselves of shame and guilt associated with not having access to credit. This is a relatively new thing for a lot of families, and things that are new, things that we haven't had a lot of education and context around, can be scary, and it sounds complicated and it sounds intimidating, and a lot of people have avoided the industry altogether. But unfortunately, in this society, credit has been used and is currently being used, and I think will continue to be used as a way to either open up the world to people, specifically economically, but now credit is being used to determine what someone's insurance policy will cost. And when I found that out some years ago, I was really upset about that. Um, using credit as a risk factor, determining whether or not somebody is risky, whether they engage in risky behavior, is so far off. It's just so unfair. And people are able to do it. Insurance companies definitely pull your credit report to determine how expensive your policy is going to be. Utility companies use it to determine whether or not how much your deposit is going to be to even allow you to open utility accounts. Employers are using credit to determine whether or not you are going to be a risk. Will you be a risky employee? Will you show, like, it's just how crazy credit is used for all these things, which is
isn't this, and the Chinese government will use it to determine whether or not you can travel or what kind of apartment you're allowed to have. That's where that's headed. So we got to talk about that too.
Really quick, how are employers use? Like, I'm trying to make the connection in my mind. How credit for employment correlate? Like, how is that validated there?
So, from my perspective, it shouldn't be. This is one of the things I hate most about credit. This is one of the things that I hate people are using credit for. Of all the things that I hate that it gets used for, that is at the top of the list. Employers are pulling credit as a means to say, and are justifying the use of credit tools, because there are many credit tools, not always looking at credit scores. Sometimes they're looking at content. Sometimes they're using it as what they call employment screening practices, right, to determine how much debt you have. So if you are going to be working in a financial industry, for example, working in a bank, they look at your credit report to see what kind of debt you have, because in the psychology of credit says that if you have a lot of debt, if you appear to be in financial trouble, that you are more likely to embezzle funds, you are more likely to steal, you are more likely to do all of those things. And they won't hire you. You won't be hired to work with money if you have credit challenges. That is, for them, is an indicator that you are susceptible to temptation around money. Yes, it is happening.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at with the People's Republic of China, where that's kind of modeling the nefarious uses of credit for that companies are using as a means of social control, and that doesn't seem right. I don't know how that is. We're allowing that kind of corporate authoritarianism to creep into our lives.
So, and this is my opinion. This is not written. There's probably no evidence anywhere that this is true. All right, this is Tammy Thompson's opinion only. But for me, these uses of credit are, from my perspective, the thing that has always happened in this country, right? As people who have been left in the outskirts of economics and financial stability, people will find a way to keep us out. And I just really believe that. It started with education, right? You couldn't read. We don't want you reading. God knows we can't have you reading. Then it was, you're not allowed to go to school. Then we were allowed to go to school. We start getting educated. So they couldn't use education as a factor to keep us out of jobs anymore, because Black folks were getting educated and getting degreed. And so they had to think of something else. We've got to keep thinking of ways to keep folks out of these spaces that will help them rise to the level of the elite, right? And so as long as people can continue to think of ways to keep folks out, they will. And right now, credit is one of the ways that folks are being kept out because people don't have a real understanding of how it works. The formula itself, there is nobody, probably other than Fair Isaac, or maybe some economists who have studied this for a long time, who can tell you how the formula works, right? We figured it out enough to be able to navigate it, right? Okay, I know I got to keep my debt under this percentage, but we don't really know that form. Nobody can explain the credit formula, right? And as long as there's these institutions and policies and systems where nobody can really understand how it works and explain it, people will use it to do what this country is really good at, which is creating ways to enhance and perpetuate white supremacy. And I mean, there is no doubt that the credit industry was created in white supremacy. It was created in elitism and classism, and it's evolved over time, but that's what it was rooted in. So things that are rooted in that, unless they are torn down and completely rebuilt, there's always going to be remnants of that. There's always going to be remnants of it. And we can keep trying to adjust. And yeah, the federal government stepped in 1970, but there haven't really been any major overhauls to the credit system since 1970, short of the Fair Isaacs people coming along and monetizing their formula. But short of that, there haven't really been any major overhauls to the credit system.
It's been maybe backtracked. There's some backsliding, especially like 2008 student loans couldn't be discharged through bankruptcy if they were made after that. That's what millennials are suffering from. It's going to be a decades-long ball and chain on that, rather than the grant programs that put so many people through college before then.
Absolutely. And believe me, it's not just millennials. There's a lot of folks who were told that going to college was their way out of poverty. And in actuality, going to college for people who did not have legacy wealth passed down to them, who didn't have access to equity from generational home ownership, had to borrow money to go to college. And in essence, in a lot of cases, it just put people deeper in poverty, because now they're in more debt than they've ever been in their lives. They're not earning enough to cover the debt of education and the increasing cost of living. And so people who were told, and I'm speaking about me right now, people who were told that going to college was your way out, it actually set me back. Going to college set me back because of the ridiculous amount of debt and the inability to gain work that paid enough, in this city in particular, that paid enough for me to cover both the cost of my debt and the cost of raising a family. So, these things, there is a lot of intention connected to a lot of these things.
It's funny, as you were talking about, Ms. Sammy, I was thinking about, I had read an article, I think several years ago, regarding Black women becoming more degreed. And at that same time, like bachelor's degrees becoming being worth less than it was prior to that. Like in just that balance of, keeping Black people in this particular status. So like, as you were talking about that, like, well, there is some studies, maybe not intentionally, not globally, but there is like, some fleck of, wait, this is what's happening when Black people, begin to advance. And we do have, we have examples of that over time, right? Like, as you said, like, when we gain access to education in the first place, like when we gain access to white collar jobs, like when we gain access to a lot of things, and then all of a sudden the rules change. The rules always change around us. And I'm also thinking about what you said a little earlier, Ms. Tammy, regarding like credit generally, like evolving and changing. Like, I feel like I'm not an extremely optimistic person. I'm not a pessimistic person, but I'm also like, I just don't see things just working out because it should, because that has not been the history of things. I do feel, I agree that, I think that credit's going to keep evolving like everything else does. But I also feel like I feel like we should have a lot of intention about what does that look like, right? Because otherwise, like everything else, right? Like education, like the job market, like housing market changing around us for the intention of keeping us in this place to be commodified, inherited only to be utilized and not to be human. I just feel like we have to have intention in what does it look like, what does credit look like, what does commerce and economics look like for us moving forward.
Yeah, there's a Black economist. Her name is Heather McGhee. Heather McGhee is, man, she has opened my eyes to a lot. I love that she is focused on the economy. I'm excited to have somebody like her working towards these things because she's studied it for a long time and she has been working with intention to make change and to raise awareness around these things. So I follow her a lot because I'm really excited about a lot of the work that she's doing to raise to shine the light. And that's the thing about, being marginalized in this country. There's so many things to fight against, right? There's so many things every day. It's like you put your finger in that and you hold this up. And all the while you're just trying to survive, there's these things that are happening right in front of us, right in front of our eyes that we can't even get to because we're focused on our most basic needs and the things that are life or death for us. And so these things continue to happen in the background right in front of us and go unnoticed and untouched because, for one, we don't understand it the way that we have to understand it. And it's so deeply entrenched in policy and they make it so complicated. And that's true. The thing that folks want to have from us, they hide it in law. They hide it in policy. They hide it in administration because, I don't know if we can ever fully understand how this thing is being used against us. And really, there's a lot of these things that started out being focused on keeping Black folks and women and anybody who wasn't a white Christian man out of it, that it's also caught up a lot of white folks, a lot of other people who weren't the intended, who are suffering in this as well. And I think that, to me, is one of the reasons why I believe that there will be changes made, because it's not just us suffering from it. And as the more people are suffering through it, the more I think there will be attention and focus around. Student loan debt. Student loan debt has been a problem for Black folks for at least 2 generations. Now that it's impacting young white folks, now we got to figure out what to do. We got to fix it and quite honestly, I don't even know if it's because of that. I think people are noticing that it's impacting the economy. When people can't buy homes, when people can't spend in the economy, now it's a problem and we've got to figure out how to fix it.
That's it. It's time for Jubilee. It's the old tradition. That goes back 3,500 to 3,500 BC too. When loans got to be stacked up too high, they just said, okay, forget it. Let's go back to zero. And off they went again. The 1.5 trillion in student loan debt, that was a serious campaign issue. So that's real talk. I was talking too about some solutions. We were asking, what does the better system look like? Or before that, probably, what does the right intervention look like, to fix what we've got now?
Are there any examples of solutions, models that aren't rooted in oppression and exploitation?
I think so. You've heard of SSB Bank it's on the north side. That its original name was the Slovak Savings Bank. There's all these ethnic savings and loans that go back to the turn of the last century when the immigrants first came here. So that was their mutual aid society. They all pooled their money, and then when people needed loans for business, and it was, I'm sure it was focused directly on those immigrant communities and the people that they thought that they would serve. So it still left people out, but Those went on. Credit unions are a lot more equitable and accessible to people, and so they're member-owned, member-governed, not banks, but loan credit institutions. Way back when, right? Was it in Africa? They're called Isusu, and Spanish-speaking countries, Latanda. Asians have one. It's a Lunhoi, and lending clubs is basically how they work. They're small scale, but it's one way. And there's a few in Pittsburgh right now, which is really nice to see. I ran into some folks in New England who had a collateral club. It's still credit, but people who knew a community member said, "Oh, you want to do goat milk cheese? All right, we know you. We know that you're solid. You know what you're doing. You're going to be reliable." And so they pulled a certain amount of their savings and said, basically, they really put it in a shoebox, and they walked into the bank and said, here's $5,000 worth of savings accounts. We're gonna back up this person's loan," and they did. And I actually met the banker, and he said, "This has been working out really well. They do due diligence that we don't have time or the resources to do, and then it's successful all around." That was called the Self-Help Association for a Regional Economy. SHARE is the acronym. They end up having a community currency, which is geared toward getting money in the hands of community members who want to have small businesses in the area. In fact, W.E.B. Du Bois is on the 5 Berkshire bill up there in the Berkshire, Western Massachusetts area. And cooperatives, now I can go into community investment where people who have an idea for a business or housing development or other ways of supporting a social or cultural or economic goal can pool their resources and make a business or a community project or cultural initiative happen. And they've been going on for 202 years. 1819 was the first one in Pittsburgh. There's a new initiative that Ujima Collective and Cocopreneurs are doing. They're having the first annual Black Cooperatives Conference coming up, October. I think that's Co-op Month. In 1931, there was a group that they called themselves the National Negro Cooperative League, and they had their first convention here in 1931 here in Pittsburgh. So there's beautiful history and lots of potential, and there's ways of making it happen that way. So those are some of the solutions that I'm familiar with and have heard and seen working. Any others?
Yeah, I'm totally engulfed in this because I don't know of any. I don't know of any solutions to it, honestly. I think that there are small baby steps being taken. One in particular, groups that fight back, economic groups, people who understand finances way better than I do, are making small strides. Somebody, I don't know exactly which group it was, but rallied together and made it so that medical bills don't get reported the same way on credit report. I mean, medical bills were one of the most ridiculous things that were showing up on people's credit reports and ruining their credit because of copays or because someone in a medical office didn't feel like going back and forth or didn't send the right paperwork to the insurance company, and that they were sending bills straight to collections. Didn't even give the insurance company a chance to pay it before it was ending up on people's credit reports. So we were seeing this all the time. So, there was a bill introduced and passed that prohibited that type of credit reporting. So I think it's going to be steps like that to actually reform and overhaul the whole system. I do think that this is the first time an administration has talked about forgiving student loan debt at the level that this administration is talking about it. I think that's going to have a huge impact on not just the credit industry, but I think it's going to have an impact on the economy, and definitely it's going to trickle down into families for sure. I think it's going to have to be stuff like that. In the conversation about reparations, when people are talking about reparations, I think credit needs to be included in that conversation. Just being honest, I think Black women in particular, Black folks, that needs to be part of the reparations conversation, right? If we're talking about equity, we're going to have to talk about being intentional about setting the tone for credit in our communities. And what does that look like? If that looks like adjusting credit scores to give people equity, then I think that should be a conversation. I think there should be a way to do that. I think eliminating and reducing debt for Black folks as part of the reparations conversation should be considered. I think there's a lot of things that can happen, but I think people have to understand how this system is impacting us first. That's why I think it's so important to continue to talk about this and to learn about credit in a way that we're getting hands-on understanding. I know there's a lot of folks who do credit repair and credit in that way, and I think that's fine for some folks. But I think our people who have a limited amount of experience and hands-on understanding of the credit system need to learn it, need to understand how the system is being used against us. And we have to learn how to navigate it, because the credit system is not going away. I think it's going to evolve in a different way, but we've got to understand how to navigate this, because it is central to us getting access to wealth building opportunities. You cannot buy a house without credit. You cannot get business credit without credit. Your personal credit is used to develop business credit. And I've talked to people many, many, many times about this. You can't circumvent personal credit. It's just touching way too many parts of our lives. And we've got to understand it better.
As y'all were talking about that, like in all of the different ways that Ron had laid out of like how to, improve on credit or just better, methods. Ms. Tammy, you just mentioned a lot of, ways that we can, to navigate credit generally. I hear so much community in that. And so what's in my mind right now is just like the need for us to be able to operate as a collective, right? And how difficult that is, especially now, right? Gentrification is a very real thing. And so in tangible ways, right? What does a Black community in Pittsburgh really look like? Because to me, it doesn't look like we have Black communities in Pittsburgh. It looks like we're herded into areas, and that's just what it is. And for a period of time too, right? We don't even have the ability to be in one place long enough to form, real relationships. And then on top of that, it's we're not choosing to be in place, right? We're being displaced, right? That's a state of crisis. You're an interloper in someone else's community. So that even takes time to heal and adjust to and from, just to be moved again, right? The folks in Homewood being moved around, and they were moved from the Hill District, in the 60s, 70s, early 70s, et cetera, right? And so thinking about tangibly, what does it look like for us to come together? And even when we're not being physically moved, what does districting look like? Because again, like Ms. Tam, you said a little earlier, policy is where power is. That's where things are hidden. That's also how the rules are. That's literally the rules of the land. But if we are not voting in the same district, to the same people, but we live in the same neighborhood, or we live in proximity to each other, have the same issues, but I'm voting with some people that have nothing to do with me, don't care about me. Then what? I'm just thinking about all of the ways that we're pulled away from each other, and just generally being able to commune with one another, right? Like how many community spaces do we really have? Like organic, real community spaces do we really have? Like in education, like how are our kids being educated around money, finance, community, unions, like, you know, these things that like give people collective power. We're not taught, I feel like, or, you know, we're not taught or encouraged to lean in towards collective power. And therefore, like when we try to come together, it's a lot of different languages being spoken. There's a lot of distrust and mistrust that happens, you know, a lot of different schools of thought and a lot of different intention and yeah, just a lot of different intentions. You know, Blackness is not a monolith that folks like to say, but that's a very real thing as well. So just because we're Black people existing in the same place, in the same space, the things that would save my life might not matter to you, you know, and if that's the case, we have a problem. So anyway, so I'm just going down, like, as you all were talking, I was like spinning on like, okay, but how does this look like? You know, how do we scale this? Like, you know, like, because I think the starting small is important because that's how you build foundation. And that's how things grow. That's how you build up power to fight a system. You build systems to fight systems. But to do that, that takes people creating community and rules of the community, right? Rules of engagement. Like, yeah, like I'm just thinking about all of the things. Like Ron, you had mentioned there's a Black cooperative conference coming up. I had no idea. Like, and I literally run a collective, like, you know, and then I'm thinking about like who has access to these initiatives, you know, like, and I'm very much from Pittsburgh. Like I toe into the spaces with the, you know, folks who would technically be above class than I am, like in existing spaces. If I didn't go to school, if I didn't sneak my way into Pitt, I wouldn't have access to none of these people. Like I would just be another faceless Black person, like everybody that I know, you know, unless you're toeing in this land, in this space, and kind of shedding your own self and your own community. So like being in that sort of, in those two worlds, right? Like in not even talking about like existing in Black Pittsburgh and white Pittsburgh. I'm talking about just existing in Black Pittsburgh. Like, and in Black Pittsburgh, like I know my people, like I know the people I grew up with, I know my family, my friends, and they don't know this other world of Pittsburgh, like the young Black Pittsburgh crowd, so to speak, like, you know, or the, you know, professional Pittsburgh crowd, like they don't, like, and they're not engaged and are not thought about in those spaces. I'm in both of them. And so I think about like, what does that look like? To what does this actually mean? Like, you know, like who are we collectively, you know, fighting for, and who are we including to that, in, you know, in those spaces?
Yeah, and you said a whole lot, a whole mouthful, right? Because I think you're right. I mean, it's so much more complicated than we have time for today, I think. But I think you're right. Everybody is not going to be on the same page, right? Everybody doesn't have the same core values. You know, I think when I think of Black Pittsburgh in particular, I think there's so many factions of Black Pittsburgh. You know, starting with, you know, the most basics, right? There's an age division, there's a sex division, there's a religious division, there's a class division, there's an education divide. There's so many things that we could focus on and say we're so far off page with each other that we would never get to the table. I think what Black Pittsburgh is going to have to do is decide that there are some core values that we can all agree on. I don't think we all have to be headed in the same direction, but I do think that we're going to have to get to a point where we are agreeing on some core values. What those are, I don't know. I think if we're talking about the elevation and evolution of Black folk and the safe, secure, all of the things that we want for ourselves, we should be wanting for other people in that way. And honestly, this whole me learning and studying about credit, this is all personal for me, right? I didn't go into any particular job trying to learn about credit. I started trying to learn about this from my own personal work, trying to elevate myself out of what I felt was despair, economic despair. And as I learned it, I wanted other people to learn it because I realized that if I didn't know, how many of my brothers and sisters didn't know? How many of my neighbors? How many people don't know? So I think we might have to start there. Each of us has something that is driving us. There's something that we all are driven by. We all are passionate about what we're passionate about, in most cases because of our own experiences. I think that we spend a lot of time trying to separate ourselves from those experiences. We don't want to think about it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to tell other people about it. We just want to go do our thing and just do it for ourselves. And I think really that is the first mistake. I think we have to stop trying to pretend that we aren't traumatized as a people. And we have to center ourselves and center our experiences in a way with understanding. If I'm hurting from this, so is everybody else. So are our folks. Maybe not in the same way, maybe not all the same experiences, but there's so much of what we've survived that we should want other people to learn from what we've escaped. I don't do what I do. I could be doing whatever I wanted to do. That's just how I'm built. If I decided today that I wanted to go to law school and become a lawyer, I would do that. Right. But what I have chosen or what's been chosen for me, I'm not going to try to get religious here, but this work has been chosen for me. I didn't choose this. Nobody in their right mind would choose this. So it's important for me to focus on the stuff. I know I can't be everything to everybody. And my weapon of choice is not going to be the next person's weapon of choice. So in the war, we're all fighting the same war, though. We all have certain weapons that we are better at. I might be a better person with knives. You might be better with guns. Ron might be better at strategy, right? But we're all fighting the same war. And I think as Black folks, if we can get to the place where we understand that just because I'm not fighting the way you're fighting doesn't mean that my fight is not part of the war. I'm in the war with you. We're just using a different set of tools. And I think if we can all get to that understanding and respect each other's weapon of choice or our skill level and understand that we all have something to bring to the table in this war, I think we could be getting a lot further.
I really like, and I would add, or maybe even underscore, because I think you might have said that earlier on, is doing what's going to help you should help others, but also like what you're doing should not hurt others. And I think that's what it comes, like personally, I think that's where it comes down to. And I absolutely agree. Like we all have our own tools, our own method of, and that sounds a lot like activism and advocacy to me, because we all fight differently. Like shout out to a lot of folks, they allowed, Nikki Jo got the bullhorn all day. That girl can go and go and go. I got you got a good 15 minutes out of me on a bullhorn, and I'm like, all right, back. Like that ain't my thing. Like we all have our own methods of how we're going to move this thing forward, and we cannot all do the same thing. Like that's not how you beat a system. It's just not. But what I will say is what I see quite often, which I find extremely problematic, is like leaning into capitalism, right? Like, and leaning into like, it's me. And because I'm Black, I wear the same skin as you, that I should be able to get away with it, even though like I'm like what's benefiting me is literally hurting you. That's never going to be okay for me. And that's, like often where I find myself battling with and arguing with like everybody's Pittsburgh phase. It's like, cause like that might be good for you, but I know it's hurting people that you don't even see. And I know it's hurting them because these are my family and my folk, or these are my neighbors, or these are just people that you just don't see. And I need you to see them. Like you ain't got to do nothing else. Like just see them as people and don't do things that's going to hurt our people. If this is if we're fighting for our people, like we just got to stop doing that. So I think like to your point, like those are that like absolutely like, whatever your weapon of choice to defeat the system, go on and lean towards it. Like we should be supportive of each other doing our own things, but also don't be out here hurting our people and saying that it's for the betterment of our people, because it's not. but I'll digress from there.
Yeah, you guys both together. That just says, so much, underscores so much, how we have to see the whole, the whole system. The credit is part of the white supremacy system. There are things built in there, housing, finance, even the design industry. Is there, but closer to home when you walk down the street, it's what's the place designed like. The transportation infrastructure, all that's, so many things are so related. I can see, we can all understand why it's just so overwhelming to folks to be able to know where to start. But hit Tammy up for knowing what the credit is, what is going on in the world in credit. Yeah, that was fantastic hearing your insight from your adventures in it, Tammy. Yeah.
Adventure is a good word. Practically being dragged to hell by credit is really what is more accurate. I mean, just understanding how much credit impacts your life financially and beyond financially was stunning to me. I had no idea. My only lesson from my parents about credit, to no fault of their own, was, when the phone rang and my mother would say, "Tell them I'm not home," right? That was my first lesson about credit, was how to avoid debt. And so, that was baked into my upbringing. It was baked into survival. It was my mom's survival. It was my survival. You paid who you could afford to pay, period. Right. And not understanding the full impact of what it was doing to our lives, and now and in the future, or at least 7 years in the future, right? You just didn't know. And really, quite honestly, when folks are in survival mode, this is the other piece of it. If you're in survival mode, you're worried about surviving today. You can't even think 7 years in the future, right? And that is something that requires you to think at least 7 years into your future. And folks in survival mode can't think that way. I'm going to do what I can do now. If I have $500 and I owe people $7, somebody's not getting paid. That's just what it is. So, helping people understand how to avoid credit pitfalls and what to do if they find themselves in those spaces is what I really like to do, because I don't want people to go through what I went through. I don't want people to be not just financially scarred, but emotionally scarred by, just feeling like you're not good enough. And this is a system that has been created that puts you on this hierarchy. Or if you have an 850 credit score, you're up here. But, the lower that number goes, the lower you feel about yourself, because society has told you that that's what your worth is based on. And it's just not true. So I don't want people focused, and we always don't focus on that number. We're not focused on credit scores. We're focused on credit content, right? What's your content? Let's focus on content and not scores, because managing the content is much easier than managing that score. You don't have any control over that number. You have all the control over the content. So, that's my, and I could forever about this, but I won't.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you mentioned as that ordeal. I remember, the occasional credit collector coming into the house. Once back in the day when they sent people out. But it's moving from how can you make the best bad decision to really working, making the best decisions for yourself going forward and your family and those, in your life.
What I love that you do, Ms. Tammy, is that you focus on the trauma. And we've had plenty of conversations around this, right? But there's financial trauma that comes along with credit and everything else that comes along with that, which I think is such a beautiful way to focus on finance, because that's not what we're taught, right? We're taught that there's something wrong with you. And you need to fix yourself, and so we were talking a little bit about financial literacy, the language around it. Like, and for the record, like, I think we should be financially literate and understanding of like how all of these things work, like what makes it all work and tick. But the language around it is super violent to me, because it's very much like, oh, you poor, uncivilized Black people, let's teach you how to manage your money because that's what your problem is. It's like, no, that's not. Like, but if that's what we're being taught and told, and it's also, you know, a means to excuse further oppressing and exploiting Black folks, like, you know, Black and oppressed people, right? Because it's, you know.
And typically it's really about, most of the financial education curricula are created by lenders, bankers, people who who benefit from this whole credit structure, right? So, you know, we don't invite banks to come in and talk to our folks at all. We developed our own because I don't want, you're here to sell people on a system that is benefiting you, and we can't, you know. So yes, and you're absolutely right. The way the language is structured, the way the messaging has been developed over time has been, you know, a dominant sort of subservient, you're, you know, worth, even the term credit worthiness it annoys me, right? Like the whole language around it, the vocabulary, everything around it is exactly that, Shannon, is violent. And so that, again, is another reason why I think it's so important for us to be doing our own financial counseling work, our own financial literacy curriculum, because if we're not focused on it from a trauma perspective, then we're missing the full context of it. So I don't talk to anyone about credit or, you know, counseling, credit building, wealth building, any of those things without talking about the trauma of why we haven't already obtained these things, right? Because there's a reason for it, and it's not us. It's a system that was built against us. And knowing that is really important because it helps eliminate a lot of that guilt and shame that people walk into these spaces and that can become barriers, obstacles to really wrapping your brain and mind and arms around it. And unfortunately, it is the system. It is the system, and we have to figure it out, and we have to be able to navigate it. As much as people, I like to protest against it, and I know some people that do protest against it. Quite honestly, religiously, Muslims are not supposed to be using the credit system. We're not supposed to be getting loan. We're not supposed to do it. But because we're living in a Western country, we're living in a country that is, everything is rooted in it. You have to figure out how to navigate it, right? So the usury, and usury really is just literally, it's just the allocation of interest on debt. There are some moral challenges with it, right? Because people can use interest debt to get rich. It, you know, it is the root of capitalism. So I think we have to understand these things so that we can figure out how to navigate it and how we can figure out how not to be the victims of it, right? Because I always say, people who are like, I don't want credit cards. Well, unfortunately, it is the way that you build credit, but that doesn't mean that you have to be completely victimized by it. If you only use it and pay it off every month, there is no interest attached to it. You can beat the system if you understand the system. Not carrying debt, using debt, but not carrying debt helps you eliminate and avoid those usury policies. So there's a way to do it. And we've got to learn it, and we've got to master it, and we've got to stay as far ahead of the game as we can, because once we all figure it out, they're going to change it anyway. They're going to move the finish line again anyway. So we got to stay on top of this.
So that I was going to say, you know, as we're figuring out and navigating debt, credit, and all of that, like, we do need to be participating, right? Like in policy and law, like paying attention to who's where and what they're doing and what they're saying. Locally and federally, because it, you know, the line is going to move. It always does. You know, anytime we get close to it, it's like, nope, here it is. Like, it's like, no, we said this is going to be the new rules. You know, so we got to pay attention to that. Miss Tammy, someone asked if you happen to have any information about the credit union on the Hill.
Yeah, Mr. Witherspoon, Mr. Richard Witherspoon, president of the Hill District Federal Credit Union for maybe 35 years now. That man has been running the Hill District Federal Credit Union. I do like the credit union. I think a lot of people don't use the credit union as much because people get sort of drawn into a lot of bells and whistles when it comes to banking. And the credit union is very low frill. Still very much a personal, person-to-person type transaction, going in and filling out loan applications in person. And it's a relationship sort of based model, which I will be honest and say that I think sort of lends to subjectivity. So we still have to be careful with an institution that is predominantly created to address those things. It can still wiggle its way in because people are human beings, right? So human beings do human being things. So that's all I'll say about that. I do like the credit union. I do think the credit union, the only Black credit union in this entire state, I think is, for the historical purposes, it's worth going in, getting to know them, asking questions, figuring out how you can be a part of it. Because again, credit unions are not just about individuals, it's about supporting an entire community of people. That is the thing that I really love about credit unions, is your money, when you deposit money into the credit union, it is supporting other members of the credit union in the community. So I love that aspect of it. I think you only have to have $6 to open an account. They have opened up the criteria. It used to be only if you lived, worked, or worshiped in the Hill District, and I think that has expanded. So I would definitely go in and talk. Richard always makes himself available to answer questions and to talk about the history of the credit union. So I would definitely go check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Ron, were you saying something?
Yes, I said, yes, that's great.
Great. All right, y'all. So I've had you all for an hour and 11 minutes. So I know we all want to get back to our Sundays, unless there's more conversation, which I'm always here for that. But otherwise, is there anything that you all want to make sure that you add to this space? Any last words or last words for the moment?
I'm just going to keep it really brief and just say, listen, I know these things can be scary, especially if we've seen people that we love be brutalized by it. Credit was very scary for me because I saw how stressed out it made my mother. So I grew up, as an adult, being stressed out about credit and being fearful of credit. And I wish that I would have learned about it a lot sooner, not just for my sake, but for my children and my grandchildren. Now, my grandchildren, when we get together, we have these conversations on a regular basis. They're sick of me throwing spending logs in their faces and talking about this stuff all the time. But I think we have to just do your own research, explore, ask questions, look for free resources around credit. There's tons of free information about credit. I will always make myself available. I'm very big. It might take me a while to get to you, but I will always make myself available to questions about credit, because I think it's really, really important for us as we are increasing our economic footprint, that at the core of that is understanding and utilizing credit in the right way. So just research, read, have conversations with people, ask questions. There is no such thing as a dumb question. Ask, read, explore, Google. There's so much information out there. Just do your own homework and try to help navigate that fear that you might be having around the unknown, because it's really the fear of the unknown that keeps us stuck. And, if you think bad credit is forever, it is not. There is a time limit on it. There are no credit wounds that cannot be healed, short of the IRS and student loan debt. So if you owe the feds, if you owe student loan debt, which is essentially still the feds, that's a lot more difficult to address. But everything else everything else is manageable. So do not let it cripple you.
I just wanted to say it was great talking with you and Shan and Tammy and and everyone out in the audience. If you'd like more information on cooperatives, I co-founded the Pittsburgh Chamber of Cooperatives, which is pittsburghchamber.coop. And feel free to get in touch with us through there. This is a great discussion. I hope we do it again and go further, and take it further, and we talk more about solutions that we're all working on. So yeah, have a good night, you two, and everyone else.
Thank you so much, Juan. And did I get that right? pittsburghchamber.coop? Awesome. That's amazing. That's amazing. Collectives are extremely effective ways of being, though we're told otherwise. So definitely look into that. I definitely will myself. I want to underscore what Ms. Tammy had said about, just talking to her grandchildren about, finances and such. Like, engage your kids and your younger siblings and your nieces and nephews, the kids you work with. Like, engage them in conversations around finances and credit, because it becomes scary. Like Ms. Tammy said, she saw her mother struggle, and be traumatized by credit, which then she, internalized herself as a child. That happens to all of us, because I have very similar stories. So definitely involve and engage the kids in this conversation as well. Thank you both for being here. Love you always. Always a great conversation, and I appreciate y'all being with my stuff every time I show up. I want to do a thing. I appreciate it. And that'll wrap us up for today. Definitely a great conversation. If you want to follow up, they're both on Facebook and super accessible. Always good for conversation and just learning new things. As I had mentioned earlier, if you are someone who is struggling with paying your rent or utilities, either if you have back rent or if you know that you are going to, struggle up into the end of this year, the program for rent relief will be going until December. You can go online and apply at covidrentrelief.alleghenycounty.us, or you can check us out at our drop-in center at 337 Fifth Avenue, McKeesport, PA, 15132. We're open Monday through Friday from 10 to 6 on most days, except Thursdays is 12 to 8. There's also a food pantry there, and also just a little free store type of deal. You could just go in and grab stuff. So either way, if you just want to hang out, or if you want to come down and apply for rent relief, ask questions, check on your application, or get something from the pantry or the little free closet we got down there, you can do any of those things. If you are someone who has a story to tell, information, something going on that you want to amplify, feel free to reach out to us. We can discuss you coming on the show yourself. You can call us or text us at 412-453-6309, or you can email us at racialjusticeandmedia@gmail.com. And that will do it for today.